Hello again. We will be looking at Eugene Delacroix today. He was born in 1798. Again, all of this is kind of feeding around the concept of the Impressionist, and these are all kind of sub-lectures to that. So Delacroix was a very important person in the formation of a lot of the ideas of color theory that the Impressionists use. If you look at how he's using these very, very bright, vibrant tones, in addition to his handling, his brush strokes, and his styles, all of these things contribute forward. He's from the Romantic period of art. Again, this is this period where we have a profound sense of emotion really kind of shown in the work. A lot of it is kind of overtly political, and for the time period, again, we have to remember this is in France, and this is between many different revolutions as well. Delacroix is an interesting person because he has a lot of connections to the French government. His family is very well connected, if you will. He might have actually had a father who wasn't actually his actual father, Talleyrand, and this might have helped him throughout his life. This is what I really think of as two wonderful images of Delacroix. The one on the right is by Nadir, the famous photographer, early photographer. But again, when you look at this kind of on the left, this man who appears to be from a foreign land kind of persona, and this is, I think, one of the things he's really kind of pushing forward. But then on the right, you have almost this really kind of classical sensibility about him too. And when you look at these two aspects of the character, and you really kind of put it in formation. This is really who I kind of think of as Eugene Delacroix in terms of the history of art. But we have, this is an image on the right from Henri Daumier, kind of showing the struggle or the ideas of art that are going on at the time. We have the battle of realism that's occurring. We have this famous cartoon on the left where we have Delacroix with his brush, and then on the right that would actually be the artist Ingres with the pen, and this is kind of this battle between what we think of as the romantic perspective of art, very emotional and expressive, and then the neoclassical, which is really driven from order and composition and stability. Again, this is kind of carrying forward a conversation, an earlier conversation in art, if you will, kind of following the trajectory of Rubens through Delacroix and of Jacques-Louis David through the work of Ingres. Again, when we think of those two people and really what they're forming in terms of art history, that's really kind of where we're continuing. The Bark of Dante, 1822, was actually accepted to the Paris Salon. This is one of his first major paintings, and again, this is directly influenced by Theodore Géricault's Raft of the Medusa. Again, when we look at this, and it's also kind of hard not to imagine a little Michelangelo in this as well. But again, we know that Delacroix was very much influenced by the Raft of the Medusa, as many artists were, and this kind of was his first step in that direction. When we look at his kind of earlier periods of art, a lot of it is kind of in a continuation of where I think Theodore Géricault, or the ideas that he started in terms of the Romantic movement, are kind of carried forward. Again, we have this like use of extreme emotion, very vibrant colors, and we can kind of continue these ideas as we look at the second major work we have from Delacroix, the Massacre at Chios. And this is depicting an event that occurred where the Greeks are essentially struggling for their independence against the Turkish nation, if you will. And this is essentially a massacre that occurs at Chios, as the name implies. And again, when we look at history at this time, this is a popular subject that was appearing in the news, and there was a kind of a rallying cry, if you will, behind the people, the Greek people, in this fight for their independence. But again, when we look at this, we can see this kind of influence continuing from Géricault, this very, very strict emotions, or not strict, but very, very expressive emotions. And the interesting thing about paintings like this or the range of emotions that you can actually see in the people. This is carried forward to the death of Sardanapalus. It says Sardanapalum, but it's actually Sardanapalus. And this is an Assyrian king. This is a story actually from a Byron story rather than dictated directly from a historical event. But as the story goes with this, we have Sardanapalus, an Assyrian king. He's essentially being laid siege to, and what he's decided to do is have all of his horses and his concubines slaughtered in front of him. Again, when you really think about this, when you think about the chaos that's ensuing within this painting, within the thematic and this incredibly red tone that we have, this painting is although it's so incredibly violent, it's incredible to me because every time I see it, I seem to notice a new detail. The entire composition is so busy, you overlook things. You overlook the elephant heads in the corner. Probably the most famous work we have from Delacroix is Liberty Leading the People, painted from 1830. A lot of people think this is a painting from the French Revolution. That's not actually true. This is from the Revolution of 1830. And again, this painting actually was not shown in public until the time of Napoleon III because it thought it would cause so much of a public outcry. Again, we have this use of dead people, which is very unique in terms of art. This is something you see within the Romantic movement quite a bit, kind of forming our foreground. And then we have these people kind of climbing over them, Liberty actually leading the people. Liberty is the woman, of course, in yellow, holding the tricolor flag mightily above the people. And if you look at the three individuals in the foreground, it's thought to be three different representations or three different members of the social classes. Another thing we need to point out about Delacroix is that he was an expert lithographer, and we see a lot of work from him from this time in this medium. Again, we really do try to concentrate more on his paintings, but this is something that we do actually see from him as well. He did things like make lithographies of Shakespeare plays and things along this line. So his work wasn't just dedicated into oil paints. We do have this other medium as well. And again, when you look at the time period and you look at the impact that the print media has, again, this is an important medium to consider. Already from when we're looking at the work, though, we can kind of see this vein going through his work where, again, most of these works, most of these paintings are somewhat controversial just by their very nature. He's painting things like revolutions and massacres that occurred during these things. And it's really kind of at this point, though, that we see a break from this, and we see him traveling outside of France. And as it says, we see him traveling to Spain and Africa in 1832. And we start to see this viewpoint into the world of Algiers, if you will. And again, a lot of this is kind of thought to be fictitiously constructed. Again, if you imagine him going into one of these apartments with these women sitting here and actually painting them within this space, it's very unlikely, if not impossible, that this actually would have occurred. But again, when we look at this and we look at the patterning that he's using, especially in the background, this geometric patterning that he would have gotten from the Islamic presence there, the Islamic type of artwork. And again, when we look at this very much does seem almost a European interpretation of the scene itself. Continuing along this line, we have a lot of these kind of what we'll call fictitious images of people from the area. A woman with a blue turban from the Dallas Museum of Art. Again, when we look at this painting, we have to imagine that this is in some ways constructed, but it's also important to kind of point out this Orientalism that's present here, this idea of going to a foreign land and painting completely foreign things. When we look at the Impressionists and also especially the Post-Impressionists, and this idea of separating yourself from modern society, again, one of the first people we really have doing this is Delacroix. This idea of going to different cultures and really exposing yourself to this absolutely Oriental type of feeling and having it really kind of capture and change your work, if you will. rather than just kind of remaining focused on what you have. And again, when we see these kind of these paintings from this time period, again from 1857, we have Selim and Zuleika, again along the Oriental theme. We have Oriental clothing and even this Oriental saber, if you will, again all kind of feeding into this mystery that would have been concocted. We need to remember that this is a time period a long time before digital communication and anything of that nature. So when you're living in these locations, places like Paris, the average person doesn't have the ability to travel, but they get these kind of pieces from other lands. And again, this forms these mysteries within their mind, and all of these places seem so much more romantic and mysterious because, in fact, the actual information about these locations is very, very limited. So Medea about to kill her children, again, kind of moving back to this classical theme, if you will. And again, when we think about this and we think about the subject matter at hand, again, this is really kind of almost a troubling thing to think about. What we have next in exposition, is the Hartmann's Four Seasons paintings. What occurs essentially towards the end of Delacroix's life as he returns, he becomes very, very popular, and what he actually starts to do is he starts to engage in these commissions for these larger mural paintings. And again, if you kind of follow the trajectory of artists within this time period, this is usually what you kind of want, is that you start off in the salon and you kind of build a reputation through the success at the salon, and then eventually what occurs is then you receive larger commissions, and eventually hopefully you will work your way up to public display large murals. And again, when we look at this and we look at the painting style, it really is kind of not necessarily, I wouldn't use the word disappointing, but he really does kind of revert to this neoclassical sensibility, almost with this kind of flair of Rococo, of this pure ornamentalism, rather than really kind of pushing forward these overly dramatic themes. Again, what he's essentially done with this is he's kind of paired each of these stories over with one of the four seasons. And again, when you look at the stories themselves, they're not necessarily the greatest stories to read, but this is, of course, Greek mythology. Orpheus and Eurydice is, of course, the tragedy where Eurydice is chased and dies, and the other one with Actaeon, he actually gets turned into a deer while he stumbles upon Diana actually bathing and gets devoured by his own dog. So again, when we look at these stories and you look at the tale that's actually behind them, this is kind of Delacroix still having a little bit of fun. Again, they look very harmless in their true nature, these kind of nice, subtle, almost neoclassical paintings, but when we're reminded of what the stories actually are, none of them are happy stories. This is Delacroix after all. He's making the most of the situation and having a little bit of fun with us, I imagine, at the same time. The story of Bacchus and Ariadne. Again, Ariadne is left on that island by Theseus, and Bacchus is actually coming and finding her, so she's already in a sense of grief. Here we have a nice depiction of Apollo, the sun god, flying through the sky in one of the later pieces that we have from Delacroix. Again, this is one of these ceiling murals that you have, So the impact of Delacroix is actually very important. Again, when you think about the artist kind of moving forward from this point, the Impressionists and so on, he not only affects kind of the next great generation of artists, but again, the generation after that. When we look at the Impressionists and what they are actually doing with their work, Delacroix is a very important influence in terms of his color usage and also in terms of how he's actually depicting the images themselves with that wilder brush stroke, if you will.